This is the Sailing Podcast with David and Karina Anderson, episode number 7. We would love you to come and join us on our journey. Hello everyone and welcome to the 7th episode of the Sailing Podcast. Thank you for joining Karina and I on our journey. Today we have a great interview with someone who's an author, a mountain climber, an academic, a sailor, a parent, a marine biologist, and who's been a commercial fisherman. His name's Mike Litzgow. We spoke to him over Skype as Mike and his wife Alyssa are currently on their yacht in Hobart, Tasmania. Mike and Alyssa have a very inspirational story where they've decided to sell up everything and head off sailing. This must have been a challenging time, giving up good jobs and cutting off ties with family and friends. And just to make things interesting, they also took off with a 10-month-old. I'd heard that Mike had written a book about their trip. It's called South from Alaska, so I decided to contact him for a quick rundown of what they'd been up to. It turns out, not only have they had a couple of huge trips across the Pacific, but they're not finished yet, and they've got plenty more on the cards. You'll find notes for today's episode at thesailingpodcast.com/South from Alaska. That'll be just one word, South from Alaska. I'll have details there about Mike's blog and links to his publisher. Okay, it's time to get into the interview, and I started off by asking Mike where he and Alyssa were living when they first got the idea to head off sailing.
Well, we were living in Kodiak, Alaska, before we, sold the house and quit the jobs and started sailing. That's where our trip began from. But, I started thinking about sailing long distances, Lord knows when, a lot of years before that. But anyway, Kodiak is where we started our trip from.
How old were you when you set sail from Kodiak?
Oh, geez, I would have been about 38 or 39, something like that.
And how long had the plan been brewing in the back of your mind?
Yeah, I don't know, we were planning for quite a while. It takes a bit of doing, of course. And I'm not sure when you sort of transition from thinking about it and talking about it to actually planning on it, But we've certainly been talking about it for years and years and years.
Oh, that's great, because, I don't know, I feel at the moment like there's a great big magnet sort of, and I'm a little piece of metal, and every time I try and walk away from it, it just sort of pulls me back. I mean, how do you get to the stage of actually making that jump and getting away from everything?
Yeah, it's certainly not easy. We had some friends. Some German friends who spent the winter in Kodiak a few years before we left. On their sailboat. They'd sailed a 10-meter sailboat from Germany to Kodiak and eventually back. And their take was that leaving is the hardest part of any of it.
Yeah.
And so we really sort of took consolation in that, because it is a struggle to break the ties from land, as you said. We found out sort of down the track that leaving is not necessarily the hardest part, but it's certainly one of the hardest parts. And you just got to be determined. It's what I guess all this stuff comes down to is we can do so much these days, if you know what I mean. I mean, we're so wealthy compared to, if you look at like our grandparents' generation, and we have so many choices and so much money, just the ability to buy boats and stuff, And so it's certainly hard, but I think that if you sort of, if you're determined to steer your life one way or the other, we've got a lot of ability to do silly things like sailing across the Pacific.
Oh no, that's awesome. And so it sounds like you pretty much sold up everything and bought your yacht?
Yeah, we did. We had owned the yacht for a few years. We started off with a 25-footer and sailed that around Kodiak for a few years and really liked it. And then moved up to our 37-footer Pelagic, and we had that for 2 or 3 years, and we only bought that boat when we were pretty sure we were going to go. So we had that boat for a few years and sort of got it ready and did some trips on it, and there's just incredible sailing around Kodiak, just really, really good. Yeah, and then we sold our cars and sold our house and quit our two permanent jobs with the U.S. government.
Okay.
And sort of sailed away from it all.
And you had a young baby when you set off sail. Is that right?
Yeah, that was the real twist, because we had a 10-month-old. Our oldest son, Elias, was 10 months old. And we didn't know anyone who had sailed long distances with a kid that young. So there was really no one we could talk to, to get advice, about how doable it was. We knew that people had done it, but, we sure hadn't met anyone who had done it. And so he was born in August, which up north, that's sort of the end of the summer.
Uh-huh.
And, during that winter, that subsequent winter, we were planning on going, and getting ready to go. And that really took a bit of, that was a leap of faith, I guess, and it was really Alyssa at that point that had the sort of the determination that we had to go, that if we decided it wasn't a good time, we'd always sort of wonder what might have been. I think she was sort of the bedrock of our determination.
I think my mum would have murdered us if we tried to run away with a 10-month-old. What was the verdict from the family?
Oh yeah, it was generally pretty good. A little mixed at times, but I think everyone's kind of on board with the idea now. It's generally worked out.
Were you all living in the same area? Like, have you got family in
No,
Kodiak or where you were?
No, that's the thing, is Alaska is one of those places where a lot of people are from somewhere else. And so, Alyssa and I both went to high school in Ohio, sort of in the Midwestern part of the U.S., and had moved to Alaska as adults. And so all of our family was pretty far away to begin with.
Were your childhood sweethearts?
No, we actually met at the University of Alaska.
Okay.
Yeah, we were living 20 minutes apart from each other, but never knew each other.
Ah, nice.
In Ohio.
Well, that's good. You would have had a lot in common anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
So how was it travelling, getting back to having a 10-month-old, how was it travelling with a 10-month-old? Like, how did you cope? How did Alyssa cope?
Yeah, well, it's got its moments, as you might imagine. But, so I guess the answer is that the first 6 months were pretty tough, just because we were, figuring out how to be parents at the same time that we knew how to be long-distance sailors, full-time sailors. And so Alyssa was washing nappies every other day, from, all the way from Kodiak to Bundaberg, I guess, and beyond. And so, just like the routine work of it all is fairly considerable.
So you managed to do cloth nappies all the way across?
Yeah, it's really the only way to do it. It's the only way to go.
I think when we first had our first child, we were sort of trying to do the right thing, and we had cloth nappies. How long do you think we lasted with cloth nappies?
Yeah, I can hardly guess.
Probably like 6 months, and then we went to disposables. It was just too easy. But on the boat, where are you going to put the disposables?
And because you would have had salt in the nappies, did the baby get nappy rash a lot? Or
No. So the routine is, you drag them behind the boat, and then you soak them in fresh water in a bucket, and then give them a wash in salt water and give them a final rinse in fresh. But Alyssa got to the point where she could do 2 days worth of nappies with a liter of fresh.
Oh, good.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, getting pretty frugal with the water.
So did you find that out? Did you just Google how to wash nappies on sailing a boat across an ocean?
I've never tried that. No, you just, that's something to figure out, I guess.
Great. And so you're at 10 months old when you left. Your baby was what was it, Elias? Was Elias walking yet or not quite?
No, he wasn't walking. So in a way that's easier when they're really young, before they get very mobile, because you can sort of put them in one place and they more or less stay, where you're going to leave them. But we set the boat up so that we had a place above decks and a place below decks where we could put him and secure him so they couldn't get out. And so if both of us had to be working the boat, we knew that he was safe and he didn't have to be supervised. So that was pretty key to figure out. And then it's just, it's just like life anywhere, except that you're sailing instead of going to work.
Yeah, but, instead of going to work, you're sailing a boat 24 hours a day, though. I mean, how did you get sleep? How did Alyssa get sleep? When baby was awake?
Yeah, when you say sleep, what do you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, we were pretty unclear on that concept. So that was a big unknown, early on, where it was pretty hard to sail the boat coastally and watch Elias. And to get from Kodiak, to get out of Alaska is 2,000 miles of sailing, that we did. So it's, we did a lot of coastal sailing just to get out of Alaska. And there comes this point, where you're still in Alaska, where you have to make a 3-day crossing of the eastern Gulf of Alaska, where there's no, you go over a track of the coast where there's no bays or harbors. And so that was our earliest test of our ability to sail night and day with the little fella. And we really weren't, sure that we could do it at all, beforehand.
Uh-huh.
It must have been absolutely beautiful sailing, like in those areas.
Yeah, Alaska's incredible. I mean, it's pretty different, it's, and that's been fun, as we've seen the Pacific. We've crossed the Pacific twice now, and we've been to a lot of really fantastic places. And we're not that kind of traveler who kind of compares everything to home and says, oh, this isn't as good as home. But when we do go back to Alaska for a visit, we're reminded that it's so big and it's so relatively wild, and you can find solitude so easily. It's a pretty spectacular place. So,
excuse me for my geography, but in Alaska where Kodiak is that, like, were you, sailing through icebergs?
No, there's no, there are some tidewater glaciers that discharge ice, around where we were, but it's a very localized phenomenon. And there's no sea ice per se in that part of Alaska. It's southern Alaska, the Gulf of Alaska. So ice isn't really an issue there.
Right, okay.
So you had the 3-day test across to see how you could deal with it, and I guess you figured out some sort of routine.
Yeah, and the routine there when Elias was young was pretty much he'd sleep for 10 hours a night, and so we'd each more or less get 5 hours of sleep. Which of course you lose some with the changeover and everything. So it gets to be a pretty hard schedule to maintain. And then when we crossed the Pacific, we actually, when we were on passage, in the trades, we would, set the radar alarm and both go to sleep.
Ah, good idea.
We did that for our first crossing on Pelagic, but then, we're now on our second boat, we bought in California. We just sailed across the Pacific, this last year. I guess this is jumping ahead in our story a bit, but we've got a second child, and he was about the same age. He was a year old when we left California, and the radar on this boat is not very good, and we couldn't trust the radar alarm, and so we stood watch the whole way across the Pacific. And it's doable, it's hard with kids for sure, but it's certainly doable.
Was it just the radar itself just wasn't as good as the other radar you had, or?
Yeah, it's an older unit, and it's just not as trustworthy, I think, as the other one. It was sort of fiddly where you had to really tune it, to get good quality returns from targets, and so you couldn't just trust it to pick up targets necessarily. And then about halfway across it made things really easy for us by just dying completely.
Oh, that settles it, doesn't it?
So we had no radar whatsoever. Yeah. So, yes, we just stayed up.
So typically, after you left on your first trip from Alaska and you're having you're both asleep, did the radar go off? Was there anything out there?
Yeah. I mean, yes, definitely. We never picked up another yacht. So I'm not sure if we would pick up a yacht, but we picked up ships, any number of times. I don't know, maybe a dozen times crossing the Pacific. And then squalls would wake us up a lot, because you get the squalls are so tight and dense that they leave they give you quite a good radar target. Oh. So we'd wake up for bad weather too, which was also handy. You'd know there was a squall coming, so you could wake up and be ready for it.
Mm. And how old is Elias now?
So Elias is 5 now, about 5.5.
And your other child's name again?
Our other boy is Eric, and he just turned 2 a few days ago.
Ah, well, happy birthday, Eric.
Yeah.
I hope the children remember these great adventures that they've had when they get older.
Yeah, no doubt. I figure we just have to keep going long enough so that, they're guaranteed to remember. If we sail until they're 15, then they'll definitely remember.
Yes, yeah.
I'm interested in the trip from Alaska. What was your sort of next port of call after you've left the mainland of Alaska? Did you head to Hawaii?
No, we had talked about taking that route, but, from Kodiak to Hawaii is 2,000 miles or so. And it's not a trade wind passage, so it wouldn't necessarily be a very fast passage. So no, we did the coastal route all the way from Kodiak all the way down the west coast of North America to, the southern tip of Baja, California. So from southeast Alaska, we actually did a week-long passage, to get all the way down to Washington State. So, we just bypassed Canada entirely. And that was just a factor of the season where it was, late August, early September when we got out of Alaska. And, the gales, sort of the fall gales were beginning and the weather was really starting to deteriorate. So we needed to get south as fast as we could. Mm-hmm. And that actually ended up being the toughest bit of sailing that we've ever done. Where the weather wasn't terrible, but it was variable and we had some pretty bad deck leaks that we discovered. So that a lot of the boat was soaked inside and our autopilot wasn't working. And,
yuck.
We were motoring against light headwinds and so we couldn't use our wind vane and, it was pretty exhausting.
Yeah.
Stuff. Yeah. So that was a tough week. So, there's really, I think when you're starting out in particular, there's just a lot of value in just being too stupid to give up, if you know what I mean. You just gotta keep at it and kind of figure it out, because like the magazine or, sailing blog vision or version of living on a sailing boat and traveling a lot, it's not very realistic, and you don't, the sailing magazines aren't full of stories of being seasick and wet and kind of half miserable, and it just sort of takes a little getting used to that, to get to the good stuff, if you know what I mean. So I think it was sort of, good for us that we were a bit stubborn at that point. We just kept on going, even though it didn't always seem like a good idea early on.
Did either of you suffer from seasickness?
Yeah, not real bad. We both get seasick. But not bad. I think it was helpful that we both spent a lot of time on commercial fishing boats in Alaska. We're both fisheries biologists, so we'd go out on chartered vessels to do research, and I did a little commercial fishing in the Bering Sea as well. And so we'd been at sea a lot, and we were used to being a little seasick, and we could deal with it, and we sort of knew what our limits were and when we would get sick. So in general, that hasn't been a problem.
What about remedies? Do you have any sort of special remedies for? What do you think? Do you have any ideas on how to reduce seasickness?
I don't. It seems like it's so individual. So different, so subjective. I guess you'd say different people seem to respond to different things. There was one drug, excuse me, that's sold over the counter that I did really well with for a while, but then I started sort of having not a reaction against it, but I just sort of got to the point where I couldn't really get that drug down anymore. I think maybe I was associating it with being seasick.
Oh, maybe. Was that some sort of antihistamine?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the name and I can't remember it right now. It'll maybe come to me. There's this other drug called Sturgeon, it's very widely used among full-time sailors, and I think it's only available in the UK and Mexico. And that, I've used that a bit, and it works well, but then we had this funny experience when we were leaving Futuna, inbound to Queensland on this last crossing, where we knew it was going to be rough when we left, and I took some sturgeon on, and then we ended up delaying our departure for 24 hours. And so we just sat there at anchor and sort of let the bad weather go by. And after taking that sturgeon on, I was sick at anchor, and so it was sort of this unintended experiment that showed me that taking that medicine actually made me feel really bad.
There's always a side effect for every sort of medication, isn't there?
Yeah, there really is. So, yeah, it's something that, a lot of people deal with. And I don't know, I guess everyone just sort of finds their own strategy.
So I sort of interrupted you before, because you were telling us that you sort of headed across from Kodiak, skipped Canada, you sort of hopped down, I'm trying to draw myself a mud map here, you've hopped down the west coast to Baja, California, and then you took a right-hand turn?
Yep, that's right. Yeah, we got as far as La Paz, Baja California, which is a lovely old city, and spent a few months there, and then headed off for the Marquesas.
Okay.
And so that's a great trip. That's about 3,000 miles of sailing, and it was our first trade wind sailing and our first time across the equator. And it took us 21 days, I think it was, that first time. So 3 weeks out of sight of land. And it was just fantastic.
That sounds like quite a good trip, doesn't it? 21 days.
Yeah, Plagic's a Krelock 37, which is just a really great cruising boat.
Is that a monohull or a multi-hull?
Yeah, she's a monohull, and she's sort of traditional looking above the waterline. So canoe stern, long overhangs, fairly narrow beam, but then a pretty, not super modern, but reasonably modern underbody with a modified fin keel and a stake hung rudder. So she's not like a very super traditional full keel boat, and that boat really moves well in light air. And so, if we had, like on that crossing, if we had 6 or 7 knots of wind forward of the beam, we could put up the spinnaker and move along, at 3 or 4 knots. We could do a pretty bit of speed. So anyway, that's, I think, why we made that crossing pretty quickly.
That's right, because I've sort of followed so many stories going from Panama, but you've started way up higher and come down and across to the Marquesas. That would have been a lovely sail.
Yeah, it was really good. Yeah, it's a pretty common jumping off point for people from the west coast of either Canada or the U.S. Because if you go farther down the Mexican coast, you get into really poor winds for making the crossing, and it's quite hard to get away from the Mexican coast. So a lot of people jump off from.
Were there any times during your trip that you felt really you felt worried? You felt unsafe? No, not, touch wood, not unsafe. And I'm not sure why we just got lucky or if we prepared really well. I worried every day about something. And I tend to be a bit of a worrier on the boat, and there's, Plagic was 25 years old when we left. And, a 25-year-old boat has a lot of moving parts that can break. And so there's a lot of things to sort of be concerned about potentially. And, but we never really felt like we were in over our heads or anything like that, or things were unsafe. Okay. I just have this vision, and it's because I haven't sailed out in the open blue water, and I always think, oh, what about how big the waves are going to be out there? And you hear the stories of people having 30-foot waves, and that frightens me. So I guess, did you have big waves when you were out there, or?
No, touch wood, we never did. I think something that Alyssa and I kind of incorporated into our worldview is that open ocean is a refuge for sailors. And the coast and its nearshore areas where boats come to grief.
Actually, I've heard that several times, yeah.
Yeah, and that's particularly true in the tropics. In the trade winds, outside of the cyclone season, You'll get squalls, but, again, touch wood, we never saw a gale. I mean, I guess we saw a gale once anchored up in Tonga, and we were lucky enough to be anchored up. But in general, the weather is pretty benign, So, our experience in general is that it's, in those latitudes, in the tropics, sailing in the open ocean is just a delight. It's just great. Yeah.
Oh, that's good. You're putting my mind at ease for when we go out there.
Oh yeah, it's all good.
So the steps from Marquesas, what were the other islands that you went through? You mentioned Tonga just then, and that was after the Marquesas?
Yeah, so on that crossing, the Marquesas were first, and the Marquesas are just splendid. It's an interesting thing about that crossing is I think, for me anyway, some of the very best bits are at the beginning. I mean, you don't really have any reference, it's, the Marquesas are your first bit of Polynesia that you come to, so you don't necessarily appreciate how incredible they are until you're sort of farther down the track, and you've got a few things to compare with. But, yeah, so the Marquesas first, and then the Tuamotus, which are completely different. The Marquesas are high volcanic islands, and then the Tuamotus are high volcanic islands that are 10 million years old, and so they're nothing but, coral reef, nothing but atoll. And they're amazing. And we worked pretty hard to get south against the trades a bit, to get a bit off the beaten track in the Tuamotus.
Yeah, I was going to say that I've heard they're a bit more of a remote place to get to, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, they're right on the trade wind route. And before GPS, it was common for people just to bypass them entirely, because they're, potentially quite hazardous to navigate among. But with radar and GPS, it's much more manageable. So yeah, the island where we spent the most time there, Tahanea, is uninhabited at this point, and there's always yachts there in the cyclone free season, but otherwise they're pretty remote and really nice. Yeah. So yeah, after the Tuamotus, then the societies, Tahiti and all that nonsense.
Yeah.
And then you're presented with the choices, like the Marquesas, Tuamotus, and societies are pretty logical if you're coming from Panama or if you're coming from Baja, but then you just start getting into this realm of choice. And so we went from the societies to Saguaro the first time in the Northern Cook Islands, which was a really fantastic place, and we had a really good time there. And then from there we went to Tonga in the Vavau group, and then the Hapai group, which is again sort of off the beaten track, and was really great. And then we sort of looked at the calendar and said, "Oh my gosh, we're out of time." So then right through Vanuatu without stopping, and then New Caledonia for 2 weeks, and then we were off to Bundaberg.
Ah, cool. No, that's I guess that's the problem. You can be enjoying yourself so much, and too many places, not enough time.
Yeah, it's so big. The Pacific is just so big, and sailboats are pretty slow, and the cyclone season's relatively short. So we were looking for our second boat and ended up finding one in California. We weren't too upset about the idea of sailing across the Pacific again. There's definitely plenty to see on the second time.
Yeah. But what was the original plan though? You were coming to Australia. Did you sort of plan to settle here? Had you sort of prearranged something?
No, I mean, we were just coming to Australia as a target, sort of because of my backstory. So I was born in Townsville, and my dad's Australian, but I never lived here. So it was kind of, we kind of needed a destination, for our, sort of our personalities. We didn't want to just be wandering, that works for some people, but we were a little more goal-oriented. So when we left Alaska, we were going to Australia. We sort of had enough money saved up to get to Oz, and we figured we'd live in Oz for a bit and just see how we liked it, and we loved it. We really enjoyed Australia. We were here for 2 years, and Eric was born here, and then we took a year away, and And with Eric being so young, just turned 2, we were kind of looking for a place where we could stop sailing for a season, just take a season off and let him get a little older. And Elias, is now 5 and was ready for a year in school. So it kind of just made sense to stop somewhere. And then, if you're going to cruise the Pacific and you want to stop somewhere and you hold Australian citizenship, Australia is a pretty good place to do it. So we're just stopping here for the winter. And then, when the summer comes, we'll be off to New Zealand and then I don't think we'll be back to Australia. I think it's been great and it's been really fun to sort of get to know the place. But at this point, we're just going to keep on sailing, and see where we end up.
Oh, that's terrific. That's what I wasn't sure, whether your plan had sort of been just to do the Alaska to Australia trip, but no, it's actually an ongoing journey. Yeah,
it is. We don't know, of course, when we'll really end. If nothing else, we figure that by the time Elias is 11 or 12, it'll be time to hang it up. Kind of get him into school and give him a bit of stability. But that's still quite a ways off. So,
that's still a good run though, if you get through to 12.
Oh yeah,
that's not a bad run. 11 years on the board.
Yeah, it wouldn't be too bad for sure.
No.
Yeah. So we'll be off to New Zealand, this coming summer, as I said, and we're starting to hatch the idea of maybe sailing down to the New Zealand sub-Antarctic, to the Auckland Islands or Campbell Island. So I think we're going to put in for a permit to do that.
Probably need a heater too, won't you?
Yeah.
In your boat.
Yeah.
Well, they're used to it. They're from Alaska.
Yeah. Yeah. It's sort of we're thinking of it as, they're fantastic islands from what it looks like a really cool destination. And then B, it'll be sort of a way for us to work our way back into higher latitude sailing, on this new boat and sort of give it a try. In general, we both really like high latitude places.
And quickly, what's the rundown on the new boat? What sort of a boat have you got now?
Yeah, well, pretty different. She's a 45-foot steel cutter, Core 10 steel, which is this sort of corrosion-resistant steel alloy.
I didn't want to ask you, when you said you were going down south, I didn't want to say, I hope you've got a steel boat, because I thought, well, if you don't have one, that doesn't sound quite nice. You might, but you've got a nice steel boat.
Yes, we have. If all the stars align, and if we're able to sail long enough, and if we feel up to it, we've talked a lot about the idea of getting back to Alaska via the Northwest Passage, over the top of Canada.
Right.
Because there's quite a number of yachts doing that trip now. And I love the Arctic. I love the Arctic, and I'd love to do that trip. So when we were searching for this boat, one of our top criteria is that we were looking for a metal boat, either aluminum or steel. Yeah, so we ended up with this boat, 45-foot center cockpit. She was bigger than what we wanted, really. We didn't really want more than 42 feet, but she was kind of the one that we found, and there were only 2 of them built. This guy named Gary Noble Curtis designed her, so it's a Noble 451, and it's an origami boat for real steel boat nerds. Will know what that means, but there were 2 of them built in California in the late 80s, and this one was never finished by the original owner, and she was finished by the second owner and launched in 2005. So a lot of the gear is pretty new, and she's been great. Yeah, we sailed her for 10,000 miles now, and we've gotten to know the boat pretty well, and we've been really happy. So it looks like she'll be a good home for the rest of the trip.
That sounds awesome. Actually, I was having a discussion with my son the other day. I told him we were going to talk to you, and I told him, this guy Mike sailed from Alaska to Australia and sailed from California back to Australia. And my son asked me, well, which is the longer trip? The Alaska Australia trip or the California? If you had have taken a direct lines from Alaska, would that have been, which trip would have been longer?
Yeah, if we'd gone direct from Alaska, that still would have been longer.
It still would.
Yeah, California is a good ways east of Kodiak, but Kodiak is
so much further
north. 30 degrees north of San Diego, where we left from. Yeah, so it's, quite a ways farther north.
You've clocked up a lot of miles then. Sorry, Karina. So, how much, since you made that first trip from Kodiak, how many miles have you sailed?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't really know, but it must be about 25,000, I would think.
Wow, that's great. Mike, it's been, really great listening to your story. Now, I'm aware that you wrote a book about your journey as well.
Yep, that's right. It's the book is called South from Alaska.
From Alaska. Yep.
Yeah, it's the story of us, setting out from Kodiak as a family of 3 and sailing to Australia. And it's published here in Australia by New South Books.
Okay, and like if I pop something up on the website, is there like what's the way people, if they have a listen, they'd like to find the book and buy it? What's the best way to do that?
Yeah, I will send you a link to the New South website. And the book's also available pretty widely in bookstores around Australia. But anyway, I'll send you a link for the publisher.
Okay. Is it on something like Amazon yet?
It is on Amazon, but only quite expensively because it's only been published in Oz. Okay. So if you go to Amazon, you get like some weird UK reseller. It's really expensive. It's on the ebook is on iTunes Australia, and I know it's on a number of sort of Australian book websites. Yeah. But
if people buy from the Australian publisher for your book, they'll mail it anywhere. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
Oh, that's good. And when did it get? I mean, how long did it take you to write? Did you start writing as soon as you left, or did you sort of reflect on the journey and put the book together?
Yeah, I was definitely writing as we went, which is pretty much, I think that's the way you have to do it, because your memory is so unreliable. You have to have, you sort of remember what you think you remember, but there's nothing like the concrete details of what you wrote down at the time. I was writing as we went, but then I spent, a year and a half at least working on the book here in Australia, before it went off to the publisher.
Okay. But you guys have got a website somewhere with some pictures as well?
Yeah, heaps of pictures on the website, and I can send you a link for that as well. It's our blog is thelifegalactic.blogspot.com, and I'll definitely send you that link.
Oh, great. Okay, well that's terrific. And thanks again for taking the time, and say hello to Alyssa for us. Was she in the background? Did I hear her giving you some advice or not?
Yeah, I think she might have whispered something up.
All right.
At some point, yeah. So any of my more cogent answers were definitely from her.
Excellent. Oh, well, it's been great to listen to you and hear about your journey. It's amazing and inspiring. I mean, I've read lots of the sort of high latitude books, and they're all fascinating to me. And it's great that you're going to go off and have your own adventure as well.
Yeah, good stuff.
Okay, well, thanks, and we'll keep track of your journey as you go along. Hopefully, you'll keep updating the website as you head away.
Yeah, we sure will.
All right, thanks, Mike. Talk to you later.
Thanks a lot, David. Thanks, Karina.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
I'd like to thank Mike for taking the time to talk to us and letting us know about his journey with his family. And I'd recommend that you visit them at their blog, which has heaps of photos and journal entries going back quite a few years covering their sailing trips. It's at www.thelifegalactic.blogspot.com, and there's a link at my show notes pointing to their blog. The show notes for this episode are at thesailingpodcast.com/South from Alaska. The book that Mike wrote is called South from Alaska, and I've put a link on our show notes to help you find your way to the publisher, New South Books. I think they're part of the University of New South Wales. If you want a really easy way to get there, I made a page that redirects you straight there. Just type in www.thesailingpodcast.com/Mike, and that'll redirect you to New South Books website, where you can look at purchasing the book. It's not an affiliate link or anything like that. I just wanted to make it easy for you to remember the address, thesailingpodcast.com/Mike. Now, I ordered my copy today, and the postage was reasonable. It was $7, and I'm sure that they'll post it to anywhere overseas for you as well. If you have any troubles, just email me, david@thesailingpodcast.com. I want to thank Pierre, Mark, Irvin and Ryan who dropped by to like our Facebook page, and thank you to all the listeners out there. Thanks so much for spending your time with us. We have over 1,000 downloads of the podcast now, which is fantastic, and we thank you for listening and for joining us on our journey. You've been listening to David and Karina Anderson of The Sailing Podcast.